But do you think it is fair to link this murder to the Black Lives Matter movement when we still don't know the suspect's motive?
I think it's very fair in light of the anti-cop rhetoric that is sweeping the United States of America, fueled by this group, some of the vulgar, vile, vicious rhetoric that's coming out, talking about killing cops, and that's just some of the nice stuff, some of the stuff I can't even say here on TV. But there is no doubt in my mind that the two New York officers, Ramos and Lou, who were gunned down by an individual who made Facebook postings about wanting to kill pigs, and he was going to go out and hunt officers down. There have been officers across the United States who've had their cruisers shot at and struck while they patrolled. St. Louis, the same thing. Yes, this is part of a pattern now, and you'd have to stick your head in the sand to think that this thing here wasn't fueled by this vile, vulgar, slimy movement.
Mark?
I disagree with your characterization of BLM, but I'd be curious to ask you, do you think that every cop who's been killed this year is connected somehow, the death is connected to BLM?
No, but there's an increase in assaults on police officers, the killings of police officers that may not be directly related to this movement, but you know what, there's no fear anymore about assaulting or attacking, fighting, disarming, or generally, like I said, assaulting law enforcement officers. And you know what? If the shoe fits, wear it. Just like the Dylan Roof, right, who went into a church and slaughtered 9 churchgoers and every white person in America by this Black Lies movement, L-I-E-S, was indicted because of that. And other people came out and talked about slavery, discrimination, alive and well in the United States. Well, that's why I said if the shoe fits here, wear it.
Right. I'm glad that you're saying if the shoe fits, because as a police officer, I would hope you would want to emphasize things like probable cause, due suspicion, investigation. The police officials...
Darren Wilson didn't get that, Mark.
Let me finish.
You know that. The officers in the Freddie Gray case did not get that assumption of innocence. So for you to stand up and throw that out now,
Sheriff, I haven't said... All right, I'll let you finish.
It's hypocritical.
All right.
It's hypocritical. The police officers in the Freddie Gray case didn't get that presumption of innocence.
All right, I've let you speak the entire
Darren
segment.
Wilson
Just let me respond.
didn't get that presumption of innocence.
Please let me respond. By law, we're entitled to a presumption of innocence. Even if you think that those people didn't get what they deserved, as a police officer, I hope you wouldn't say, well, 2 wrongs make a right. If anything, we should be emphasizing due process and investigation here. And in this case, the people handling the case in Texas themselves have said very clearly, we don't know the motive. So you're essentially saying that your colleagues in law enforcement who say we don't know the motive are wrong and that you do know the motive. The second piece I want to say is that your characterization of Black Lives Matter is absolutely incorrect. The argument of Black Lives Matter is not to say that police officers should be killed, that police officers should be demonized, that police officers should be marginalized. The argument of Black Lives Matter is that police officers should be held to standards of accountability just like everybody else, and the increased number of black bodies, or the sustained number of black bodies which die at the hands of state violence, needs to end. It means that while we regard all lives, we cannot exclude black lives.
What about the black victims that die at the hands of other black people? That doesn't seem to matter. And they're dying by the thousands, not by the few rare instances of the police use of force.
There were 24 unarmed African Americans killed by police this year. That's according to the Washington Post. So when you take that into account, Sheriff Clarke, do you think that African Americans, people part of this protest, have a right to have their voices heard and to protest?
It's not a matter of whether they have a right. It's a matter of whether it's legitimate. There are 104 homicides in the city of Milwaukee right now. I think there were 79 last year. Baltimore, 214. They've already matched all of 2014. So when you want to take that 24, I'm not saying that that none of that is legitimate in terms of taking a look at them, but how many of them were ruled justifiable? How many of the uses of force were determined to be reasonable and justifiable? And then let's compare that 24 to the number of stops made by police officers during that time period, and you'll find that that is a very, very fractional percentage of deaths that occur at the hands of police officers. That's what the data shows anyway. Not at all.
Okay, you're not satisfied. Now, I agree it's a problem, 80% of whites kill whites, correct?
I won't dispute that figure.
Okay, actually, it's 83%. Now, is white-on-white violence a problem in America that we should also have a robust discussion about?
Violence in America, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Congressman, violence in America in general is problematic. But if you look at the rates, that's where it starts coming a little more into balance in terms of the data I've seen, and I've looked at a lot of it. The white-on-white crime does happen, 80% figure you put out there. But when you look at the rates of it, these two are not even close.
Right. The rates are roughly equivalent in terms of the context of people who live next to each other, and because of housing segregation patterns or just where people tend to live in America, ethnic violence tends to occur, racial violence within the same group. And so elevating it beyond that fact, I think, is irresponsible. We all want to deal with the black-on-black violence problem. Now, it was mentioned that there's a cooperation issue in the black-on-black violence context. I don't think I've heard the phrase mentioned, blue wall of silence, here. So if we're going to have a conversation about cooperation when someone crosses the line, seems to me to make sense that we also have to deal with what may be another elephant in the room, to use your term, Sheriff Clarke, the blue wall of silence, that the overwhelming majority of officers are good officers. But what often occurs is that when an officer crosses the line, the ethic is not to cooperate or participate or speak on what a bad apple officer has done. Professor Ramirez, would you agree that that's perhaps something that we should also be focused on?
I think it's a serious problem both at the federal and state level. And as I said earlier, in my own experience in trying to prosecute police officers, I had problems. Here's just one problem. The FBI and DEA said we won't even serve subpoenas on a case in which there's a police officer as a defendant. Here's a second problem. They tried to testify in the case in favor of the police officer, saying that they had made their own independent evaluation of the case. This is a case, by the way, that was adjudicated guilty against all officers, and they were incarcerated for between 10 and 20 years after the trial. And as you know, in Boston, we had a problem with the FBI, that there were FBI agents who were engaged in a series of misconduct with Whitey Bulger, and that went on for many years and was not prosecuted.
Thank you, Professor Ramirez. My time is getting ready to expire, but Sheriff Clarke, you also mentioned that, the use of force should be examined in terms of factual data and not an emotional foundation of false narratives. Is that correct? Did I get your testimony correct in that regard?
Mr. Chair and Congressman, yes.
Okay. Now, was the reaction to the Eric Garner case, who was choked to death using a procedure that had been banned by the NYPD for more than 20 years, wasn't resisting arrest, said, "I can't breathe" 11 times on 11 different occasions. There was no response by all of the police officers who were there. Was that a false narrative that people in the city of New York and the country are reacting to, sir?
Mr. Chair, Congressman, first of all, he wasn't choked to death, not from the report that I had seen out of the grand jury testimony, and even from the medical examiner's report. He wasn't choked to death.
The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide by asphyxiation. In the ghetto, that's called being choked to death, sir.
Well, we're going to have this discussion later on then about the facts, because we could be here for a while. My understanding is he died of a heart attack, okay? So, but anyway, you said that he wasn't resisting arrest. He was resisting arrest. He was told that he was under arrest and put his hands behind his back, and he wouldn't do so. And that's why I put in my remarks here the reference from Thomas Sowell about when law enforcement officers tell someone they're under arrest and they can't use force to execute that arrest. We don't have the rule of law when it's merely a suggestion for them that they're going to jail or to put their hands behind their back. Those are behaviors, like in the instance of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, where some different choices by the individual could have helped the situation. In other words, Mike Brown was just simply told to get out of the street.
Sir, my time has expired, but for you to come here and testify essentially that Eric Garner is responsible for his own death when he was targeted by police officers for allegedly selling loose cigarettes, which is an administrative violation for which he got the death penalty for, is outrageous. And if we are going to have a responsible conversation, we've got to be able to at least agree on a common set of reasonable facts that all Americans can interpret, particularly in this instance, because they caught the whole thing on videotape.
Welcome back to Hannity. So a good friend of the show, Sheriff David Clarke, he made waves when he called out the hypocrisy of the mainstream media over fake news, tweeting, quote, "Fake news was born in August 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, when the MSNBC, mainstream media, the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN all propagated the hands up, don't shoot lie." Now, here are just a few examples that he mentioned. Take a look.
Outrage in Ferguson, Missouri today after police shot and killed an unarmed teenager Saturday afternoon in broad daylight.
The kid body jerked as if he was hit from behind, and he turned around and he puts his hands up like this, and the cop continued to fire until he just dropped down to the ground and his face just smacks the concrete.
So when he turned and faced him and put his hands up, was he standing still at that point?
Yes.
Thousands of Americans are marching in New York and Washington and across the country, demanding a justice system that applies the same to everybody and honors our values. And we want you to know that our hearts are out there marching with them.
Oh, they all had their hands up, don't shoot. All this began when the mainstream media took the word of Michael Brown's friend when he gave his version of the shooting that day back in 2014. Watch this.
His weapon was already drawn when he got out the car. He shot again, and once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and he put his hands in the air, and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots, and my friend died.
Joining us now, Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke, trial attorney, political commentator Eric Guster. That was the guy that was with Michael Brown, Sheriff, when he robbed and intimidated the clerk before they were confronted by the police officer. Isn't that true? And then the media took that lie and they ran with it without any fact checking. There were a number of people in the trial that ended up, or when they had the grand jury, that ended up saying didn't happen that way. They said he charged the officer, he engaged the officer, tried to take the officer's gun. And that's why Darren Wilson was never indicted, right?
Well, it's why I said, Sean, that fake news has a birthplace and a birthday, August 9th, 2014, when this widely held false belief of hands up, don't shoot was propagated by the media. They went down there and fit their narrative. Think about what happened off that fake news, Sean. It changed America. This anti-police sentiment rose out of this. This, what I call the bastard child of hands up, don't shoot, Black Lives Matter, grew out of this thing. It swept the country. There are people to this day, Sean, who believe that Mike Brown had his hands up and was walking away with his back turned to Darren Wilson when Darren Wilson shot and killed him. In fact, we all know that's a lie. And only one Washington Post writer had the character, had the integrity to admit that it was a lie. I think it was Jonathan Capehart is his name, who wrote an op-ed and said, yeah, we got hoodwinked on that thing. It was embarrassing for this industry, and he had the courage to do it. But to this day, no other media outlet has done it.
No, Eric, you do know that that never happened, right? You're not arguing that hands up, don't shoot actually happened, are you?
I'm not arguing that hands up, don't shoot ever happened,
because
but what David Clarke is trying to, no, it did not happen. But what David Clarke is saying is the dumbest thing I've heard on TV since Florida said they were going to be Bama. What he's claiming is the hands up, don't shoot movement was the beginning of fake news sites. The Onion was started in 1988, which is the premier fake news site.
Eric, that's a satire site.
It is fake. It is a fake news site that some people think is real.
But in a serious sense, that false narrative was perpetrated by NBC, by ABC, by CBS, by CNN, by the New York Times, and
they came out and said it was a lie.
Hang on a second. And irresponsibly, they advanced a narrative where people were regurgitating it, and then as a result, a certain expectation was raised. And then when the black eyewitnesses testified before that grand jury, it wasn't the outcome that people expected. And what happened, Eric, as a result of their irresponsible reporting? What happened?
a lot of people fell for that. But all those media
What
sites,
happened?
all those NBC, MSNBC, all of those sites,
CNN,
all those stations came out and said, all of them did. They said that was a lie. I've said it was a lie. So let's not.
I don't remember them saying it was a lie. I don't remember a big apology saying we were wrong and we falsely reported from a guy that robbed up a store and intimidated a clerk. Sheriff Clarke.
They did say that was not true. They did. No, let me finish. They did say that was not true. And for you to say, for Clarke to claim that was the beginning of fake news is the most ridiculous thing.
Sheriff Clarke. Sheriff, you want to respond?
Well, it's fine. It might be ridiculous, but I'll tell you what, we have dead cops because of that hands up, don't shoot lie. We had 2 in New York. We also had 5 in Dallas and some in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, people who were trying to avenge for the life of Mike Brown, who was a thug. Here's another thing they left out of that story.
Been 11
Mike
cops
Brown had just strong-armed a convenience store clerk who was half his size. That is a felony in every state in America. And he also tried to disarm a law enforcement officer. That's how serious this was. It might sound dumb to you, but there are dead cops because of that fake news story out of Ferguson, Missouri. And Eric, I resent that coming from you.
No, your theory is dumb. Someone attacking cops is a personal thing to me. I do not want anyone to assault, harm, or kill cops.
Then don't make irresponsible comments from the media that suggest something that never, excuse me, they advanced a false narrative, a lie. And as a result of the lie, people believed it. And a certain expectation increased in people in terms of what the outcome would be as a result of the lie that it was all predicated on. That's the problem.
But the truth is,
Eric,
no, the truth
Eric, let me help you out here. The only people who believe the Onion are
Ferguson,
liberals, because
there were
liberals don't
many
critically
cases
think
of African Americans
they're susceptible to nonsense,
being
and all they can do is parrot talking.
Last word, Sheriff.
No, the Civil Rights Division stated that
last word, Sheriff. Let the sheriff have the last word.
Fine, thank you, Sean. Again, fake news. You know, most people can figure it out. It might last a day or two. But the hands up, don't shoot fake news out of Ferguson, Missouri continues to this day, and cops are still being killed across this country based off of that fake news story.
All right, we got to leave it there. Thank you both.
Sheriff David Clarke of the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, and Julie Roginski, Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor. Great to see you both.
Good to see you, Megan.
I love when Sheriff wears his hat. Sheriff, your thoughts on the president's comments?
Well, you know, Barack Obama for 7+ years has played the race card that every time somebody criticized him, it was because he was black, and it scared off a lot of Republicans. So now they're going to switch and try to play the gender card. The problem is the American public is tired of this class warfare. The reason why they don't like Mrs. Bill Clinton is not because she's a woman. It's because she's dishonest and because she is hiding something. She's hiding the truth. She tries to play herself off as a victim, like she's Little Red Riding Hood, but she's more like the big bad wolf. As soon as you turn your back on you, she'll bite you. Now, look, this is politics. It's a contact sport. It's not for the faint of heart. My response to what President Obama said is if she can't stand the heat, she should get out of the kitchen.
Julie?
Well, first and foremost, I think you just proved my point, Sheriff. And, you know, you and I were outnumbered last week, and I love you, but she's not Mrs. Bill Clinton. She happens to be Hillary Rodham Clinton, who's her own person and is running as her own individual. She's a former senator. She's a Secretary of State. She's not Mrs. Bill Clinton, and I think you just encapsulated exactly why a lot of women think that
it's not my job to give you her bio.
It's not her bio, but it's also not your job to assume that she's just the little woman who's married to
She has run with that name for a long time.
Well, she's run for that name because she happens to be married to the former president, but she's certainly not Mrs. Bill Clinton.
She should embrace it.
Well, no, she actually shouldn't embrace it. She should embrace the fact that she's a very accomplished lawyer in her own right, a very accomplished woman in her own right.
Let me ask you this, Julie. Let me ask you this. Do you think there's something to the notion that many Americans find the idea of a female president somehow threatening? Do you think there's anything to that?
You know, unfortunately I do, and it's a shame because I think, but you have polling showing, poll after poll showing, you have Anna Greenberg, who is a very prominent pollster, saying that her numbers went up when she focused specifically on women's issues, whether it's standing by her man when she was First Lady after the Monica Lewinsky scandal, or working on traditional women's issues, or even working as Secretary of State for Barack Obama, who's a man, but her numbers are not so great when she's running for something, when she's working in healthcare reform, when she's become a principal and taken on roles that are traditionally men's roles. And I think, unfortunately, I hate to say this because as a woman who is living in the 21st century. I would hope this is not the case, but empirical data shows, unfortunately, that it is the case.
You know, Sheriff, I remember 8 years ago when Sarah Palin was on the Republican ticket, they were doing full articles about how she was going to balance her situation of having, I think, 5 kids and being vice president. It was just like, basically, for lack of a better term, screw you for writing that, right? Because nobody was wondering how Barack Obama was going to balance having 2 kids.
Yep.
So it's,
Right, Megan,
it's
you
still
took the
there
words
to
out
some
of
extent.
my mouth.
Go ahead.
When you mentioned Sarah Palin, because the way the Democrats treated Sarah Palin was nothing short of shameful. Also, the way they treated Condoleezza Rice when she was the Secretary of State, they did the same thing. So all of a sudden, when it's one of those women who gets close to the White House, then it's okay to trash them. But when it's one of their women, then they try to play the victim card. America's tired of that stuff right now. She should stand on her own 2 feet. Take the heat. Look, this is for the presidency of the United States. Nobody's going to feel sorry for her.
Right.
Nobody's going to back down. I'm glad Donald Trump's not handling her with kid gloves.
Right. Julie, that is true that there was Sarah Palin endured a lot of sexism when she was running, and the women's groups, I mean, the silence was deafening. They were not there for her, you tell me, because she is a Republican.
No question, and I agree with you 100%. Sarah Palin got the short shrift in many ways.
So you understand why Republicans are like,
100%.
boo-hoo, we're not
No.
listening to your complaints now. Where were you when one of ours was being attacked?
First and foremost, some of us were there for Sarah Palin, not specifically on her policies towards women or things that we help women. But some of us did feel that Sarah Palin got incredibly short shrift, especially when you said what people were saying, how is she going to balance having children and she had a newborn.
And put her on the cover, I think it was of Newsweek, in a photo shoot she did for a biking magazine.
Yep. But listen, I'm not sure she should have posed for that necessarily for that picture. But,
oh, come on.
But having said that, look, I mean, there's no question that if you went to the Republican convention, as all of us did, and you saw some of the buttons being handed out, and you saw some of the things that were said about her, she was called the B word, she was called the C word, she was called all sorts of names that I've never heard a man being called, and you can't say that's anything other than sexism, unfortunately.
All right, I got to leave it at that. Give you the last word. Great to see you both.
Good to see you.
Here live in Cleveland. You're set to speak tomorrow night. And again, all I want to do is have a conversation. I can't have a conversation with you if we're both talking at the same time. What it sounds like to me is that you're accusing me of violence and supporting a narrative that I'm not necessarily in support of. And if that's what you're accusing me of violence, then you can leave. That's not true. I don't support violence of any type against police officers, against anyone. So if you're accusing me of that, then you're welcome to leave. But if you want to have a conversation, I am more than willing to welcome a conversation with you. I don't disagree with you about there is a narrative across the country that could be harming police officers. But we don't know right now, as someone who's in law enforcement, if that was the actual cause of it. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. Do we know that generally the American law enforcement officers are racist? Do we know this?
Go on.
I ask a question.
Do I know American general law enforcement are racist? I don't think anyone is accusing. If you're insinuating that people are accusing or saying that law enforcement across this country as a whole are racist, then your assumption is wrong.
First of all, this whole anti-police rhetoric is based on a lie. There is no data, and you know this. There is no data, there is no research that proves any of that nonsense. None.
You'd have to be more specific about what data and what nonsense you're talking about.
That law enforcement officers treat black males different than white males in policing in these urban centers.
There is data that supports
There is not data.
No. The president spoke about it. Cedric Alexander, who is a law enforcement officer. The president has been lying about it. He said it again the other day when he said black males are 2 times more likely to be shot by a law enforcement officer than white males. Don, that is a lie. That is not a lie.
It is a lie.
Yes.
Show me.
The research that we have from the Washington Post. The
Washington Post debunked that nonsense.
There's also research.
He also said this time.
There's also research.
He continues.
A Harvard professor that also showed that black people are treated more aggressively by police officers.
No, you are wrong
people.
in your interpretation of that Harvard study, because I read the study. That's not what he said. He said he was surprised to find
that in shootings of the most severe in shootings, that he found no evidence that there was a difference. Also, it should be noted that that study was a very small sampling of police departments across the country. Many people did not find it credible, but it is also interesting that in that research, he found that blacks were treated differently when it came to aggressive policing, but for the most egregious shootings, he found no difference. That's what that study showed.
Well, based on what? Just generally? Are we talking about high crime areas? Are we talking about police officers being under attack? Because let's go back to where this whole thing started in Ferguson, Missouri. The lie was hands up, don't shoot.
Lumping a whole bunch of things into one. If we can do one specific
That's
thing,
where this whole phony movement started. It started out as hands up, don't shoot.
You're talking about Black Lives Matter,
right?
Okay. So if you want to, you would need to speak to someone who is a member of Black Lives Matter about whether they have perpetrated a fraud on the American people. That's up to Black Lives Matter. That's not me. I'm neither a member of Black Lives Matter, I'm neither a supporter or someone who doesn't support them. I simply report on Black Lives Matter.
Do you condemn the anti-police rhetoric coming from this hateful ideology?
As a journalist sitting here on television, I don't have to condemn anyone, anything. That is something that you should ask. Other people around the country,
I condemn
their jobs to condemn
just
that.
Like I condemn the hateful ideology out of groups like the KKK. All right? I condemn it. There is no place in American discourse for that sort of vile, vitriolic hate coming out of this ideology. This has fueled and fanned the flames of this anger toward the American police officer. There's only one group in America, one time, that truly cares about the lives of black people in these urban ghettos. And it's the American police officer who goes out there on a daily basis, puts their life on the line to protect who? Black people. So when you say we just want to have a conversation, let's have a conversation about the black on black crime, which kills more black males, which is more of a threat to any black male in the United States than a law enforcement officer.
Sheriff, yes, that's a different conversation.